For those of you who are joining us for the first time or are new to the Tech Council, the San Francisco Tech Council is a multi-sector initiative, and we build government, business, nonprofit, and consumer collaboration to advance digital inclusion for seniors and adults with disabilities in San Francisco so all can participate in the city's connected community. And that brings us to today's program and its focus on accessible design. So to get us started today, I'd like to introduce Dan Gillette, who is a member of our steering committee. And he also works at the intersection of design and culture with a special focus on co-design, education, public health, disabilities, civic life, and healthcare. So Dan, I'm going to hand over to you.
Welcome everyone. First off, I just want to give a shout out. Happy birthday. This is Snuffleupagus' birthday from Sesame Street, who is 4 because he always turns 4, even for the past 40 years. And, you know, someone who understands some of the issues we'll be talking about, because for I think about 4 or 5 years, only one person in his community saw him. So he was an invisible but very real person in that community, and it took a long time where people denied his existence. It took a long time to prove that he was a member of that community. So happy birthday, Snuffy. So I'm just going to take a quick few minutes here to frame some of the issues that our guests will be talking about, and perhaps provide a little bit of a framework for our discussion. I've been working in accessible design, adaptive technology for probably over 25 years now. And we see strides made and lost throughout time. And it seems to be a constant ebb and flow. Often things look very simple, and maybe technologically more and more the solutions are getting simpler, but the reality is technology is a cultural phenomenon, lives in our world of policy and culture and biases, and something that keeps is a big factor in that ebb and flow where we might get to a process or a technology pathway where things tend to be improving, and then we kind of slide because we kind of let it go. And as an example, with what's been going on in the news, I've been thinking a lot. About 7 years ago, for about 3 years, I was heavily involved in a variety of civil rights and technology projects related to voting and accessible voting. And vote by mail is big in the news, and I did quite a bit of work there. And I think that that's a good example, just to touch on that work, of some of the broader issues. Voting is very interesting from an accessibility standpoint, because really all you're doing is presenting someone with a list of options and asking, which do you want? I mean, it's about as simple a technical task as it gets. But then with policy, with politics, with different demographics, it gets very complicated. For instance, when that list, as we saw in California not too long ago, when that list for governor is 170 plus candidates, whereas how do you accessibly find your candidate if you're listening to an audio ballot? So that's one issue. The other issue that we saw come up was with voting is one of the sort of underbellies of universal design in its practical nature. So universal design is this idea that sooner or later we can refine products to where the one product works for everybody. But the reality is from its inception as a design concept and a technological concept, we've always accepted that about 20% will need a different but equal solution. That there will be people who have certain needs that it's just too costly or complicated to have everyone use the same stuff. And in voting, that really plays out. So in the polling place, what happens is more and more we have paper ballots that the nation has really returned to in the polling place for most people. But if you have trouble with the size of the font or with manipulating the ballot, standing, you're brought over to often an outdated electronic voting machine that's supposed to be accessible. And the issue here is lots of people have different expectations from the technology of things like a voting machine. So you have people like expert users who may at home use something like a screen reader or special switches to help them, or certain types of magnification tools. And they expect when they are brought to the accessible machine that this would be something that is similar to the things they've practiced and learned how to use. But then we also have people who this is the only day of the year that they need this accessible technology. Their eyesight might be going, or they might have arthritis, but they're retired and their lifestyle, they've decided, doesn't call for solutions, except on this day when they are there to vote and suddenly they're disabled when the rest of the year they're not. And they're not trained on these traditional techniques of very complicated but useful solutions of technology. And so those two groups are at odds with each other. So that's one issue that we see, even in something as simple as which one do you want from this list. As a result, vote by mail is really by far the most popular choice for voting among the disabled. It allows you to pick your own solution in many ways, but there are still issues. So for instance, some of the things we've seen come up is people, one of the things they like is someone else can fill out their ballot for them if they're having trouble doing that or reading it. The dilemma there is often that social situation introduces bias, no matter how much people try, how you read that list. I've worked with professional ballot filler outers and they worry about that all the time. You know, I might just say this name differently. More often what we see is someone gets to a point in the ballot where I don't care, I don't have an issue, you can go ahead and vote. That would be legal in Denmark. In the United States, that's a felony. And often we see this happen. So that means that the person who's filling out the ballot may be voting twice. And it seems inconsequential. These things sneak in. So that's what happens when we start to introduce those sort of proxies. So one of the projects we worked on was with the state of Maryland to look at how to create a ballot marker that is via the internet. So you go to your browser, you get your standard ballot, you use your own tools and your own methodology on any device of your choosing, and you select what you want, which opened up a lot of opportunities and made it closer to maybe a 90% than an 80%, because those expert users with their assistive technology could use what they already had at home. And then other folks who are just comfortable with an iPad or whatever could use that. But then there were other issues. Because of that, it was a ballot marker, not internet-based voting, they had to print out this ballot. They then had to sign the ballot and get it into an envelope. And the post office and ballot reading machines are very specific about how you fold these things. So for some of our blind users, there were issues there. But how did we get to solutions? So one solution was to allow half the page on the last part of the ballot to be where you sign. So all you had to do was fold it in half and you knew where to sign. You still needed a printer, you still needed an envelope, but that helped there. And one of the ways we got there was, what was exciting about that project is we were able to, instead of test it in the lab, we just watched through people's devices as they use this tool in their own homes with their own tools. An exciting advancement. But what it also did was it reiterated some of the existing biases we see in universal design and human-centered design, of which I'm a staunch practitioner, which is sometimes you can't get to the people who are kind of invisible because of the way things are set up. So our focus in testing that, of course, it was much easier to test that with people with sensory impairments, individuals with certain mobility impairments, often more expert users in the assistive technology, because they were likely to volunteer and able to be interested in that. Who were we missing? We were missing people with cognitive impairments, which is often an issue. You know, sometimes you just can't find enough users to co-design a product with you, or you don't know how. And so these are some of the issues that are coming up. And I think that it's what gets us to solutions that work for a while for certain groups of people very well, but inadvertently forget or cut other folks out, and our dilemma of getting to that one system for everyone. And here we are in a new election, and we're seeing all these things play out again. There's the other issue of resources. Websites that tell you how to vote and where to vote. Did a lot of work helping counties understand where their websites were inaccessible, but their issue was, it wasn't just knowledge. They didn't have the resources to hire programmers who actually knew how to do the very basics of making those sites more accessible. They just didn't have the funds and the time. So all these issues play out, and it's almost always not the biggest challenge. Well, often a big challenge. The biggest challenge is not the technology. The biggest challenge is, who do we include? How do we include them? When do we include them? And what priority in our limited resources is accessibility given? And that's why we have pushes where we see great advancement. And then we see, so like around 1999, the internet was very accessible. Right now, the internet's not, and that's because technology changed. We got that technology to a certain point, and then we slid.